Ó, o negócio é o seguinte, há umas semanas atrás, a galera meio que soltou isso daqui pra rapaziada, né? Documentário do Python, e parece que é uma espécie de uma versão meio que original, né? Se é que existe uma coisa dessas. E, cara, eu achei bacana, né? Eu pensei, poxa, será que não dá pra trazer isso aqui no canal? O vídeo ele é todo em inglês, mas lá no YouTube, né, eu consegui ligar ali a legenda e deu pra ver de uma maneira bem legal, né? Eu não cheguei a ver isso daqui ainda não. Eu acho que vale a pena a gente acompanhar junto isso daqui no canal, né? Vou ver se eu consigo levar pra cá. Então, assim, eu consegui ver algumas partezinhas aqui, ver se a legenda tava batendo. Parece que tá, cara. Vamos lá, vamos ver um pouco disso daqui, né? Python, The Documentary, an Original Story. Bora ver como é que é isso aqui.
Did you think Python was going to get popular from the beginning, or?
Que isso, cara? Ó o pai charme.
Python has contributed to making critical thinking a little more approachable by more people.
You could spend 1 to 2 hours learning programming fundamentals, and then you can write like 10 to 20 lines of code that do something interesting.
The language, the community, the ecosystem, the market, the whole thing has had such an impact on humanity.
Today, I think it's safe to say that almost anywhere there's a computer, there's probably some Python.
It's literally on Mars.
The impact of AI, I think we're still seeing what that's going to be. Python is incredibly important for that.
To fully understand
how
Python got so big, we have to go back in time. Maybe not that far back. Everything started back in Amsterdam in the 80s during my time at CWI, a Dutch research facility.
The CWI had been behind a lot of major programming language developments, Algol 60 and Algol 68, for instance. And Lambert Meertens had tried teaching programming to artists and discovered things about programming that are easy if you're a scientist or a geek, but for somebody like an artist, those things weren't obvious because you had to know something about the computer.
The cause of the frustration was the low level of the languages that were available.
The computers were immensely expensive, and compared with that, a programmer was really, really cheap. And so programming languages were designed with that economic relationship in mind. It didn't matter if it took a long time to program, as long as it didn't demand too much of the computer, because that's where the cost was.
We looked at each other and said, can't we do a better job? Can't we design a language that is easy to learn, easy to teach, but also easy to use?
So that beginners could understand how to program without having to go into all those messy hardware details.
And that's how the ABC project was born. One of the members of that team was Guido van Rossum.
I was hired to work on ABC, for which there was a small prototype, but every part of the prototype had to be expanded to fully working according to the spec.
In 1980.
Rapidinho, só falando aqui, porque eu acho que ficou bem claro, né? Mas para quem não tá entendendo nada enquanto isso, é porque é o seguinte, eles estavam num centro de pesquisa, eu não sei se isso aqui é universitário, e aí eles tinham, né, que fazer um projeto que era relacionado a uma linguagem que fosse um pouco mais acessível. E começou essa ABC aí, ó, é uma linguagem que se chama ABC. Hoje ela é considerada uma linguagem impraticável, mas foi aqui a sementinha do Python tá aí, ó. Eu tive que estudar esse negócio para fazer uma palestra uma vez lá na Python Brasil. Mas é muito interessante, né? Porque olha só, naquele tempo o povo já tinha essa vontade por querer entender programação de um jeito mais simples, né?
1985, we made the release of ABC. And then we hit the problem how to make the world know that there was ABC.
We did not have a good way of reaching our intended audience. The internet did not exist. Most people had never heard of a computer or even seen one.
If anybody wanted a copy, they had to send us a letter and we'd send them a floppy disk.
So I'm afraid ABC reached very few people, and at some point the directors, for a reason that I still don't understand, killed that project.
I had spent, 3.5 years of hard work on this language and the implementation to make it as good as we could. So it was disappointing.
Triste, mas...
Guido was transferred to another project on a distributed operating system, the Amoeba system.
One of my jobs at that project as the programmer, not the researcher, was to write or help write a large number of user applications. And I didn't actually think that for many of those utilities, C was a very good language. And I thought, wow, oh man, if we just could program ABC instead of C, each of those utilities would be like half a page of code, and I could write the entire suite of utilities in a couple of weeks, instead of the years that it looked like it was going to take us.
Except that ABC was so high and abstract, it wasn't a good language to talk to servers and file systems and processes, and it's sort of the whole operating system thing was abstracted away from ABC.
So I thought, well, there really ought to be a language that sort of bridges the gap between C and Shell. And we looked at Perl, and we didn't think it was any good as a programming language. It was about as bad as BASIC, although in different ways. So Python was also, in a part, built as an alternative to Perl. That's where I decided, oh well, I'm gonna see if I can make my own programming language.
Não, meu Deus, vou fazer aqui a minha própria linguagem de programação, porque vai ser melhor assim. Cara, meu Deus do céu, véio. Fala isso pro teu chefe hoje. Mas é o seguinte, só tentando contextualizar aqui também, pessoal, isso daqui eu acredito que seja lá nos anos 80. Java nem existia, não existia JavaScript. As linguagens mais famosas mesmo eram, assim, mais robustas, né? Então, C ainda era uma linguagem bastante disruptiva ali na época. Isso aqui foi realmente uma coisa bem interessante. Eu não sei se eles vão mostrar alguma coisa de ABC aí, mas ABC tem uma sintaxe muito parecida com Python. Você olha e lembra de Python na cara, assim. Mas é muito nisso, né? Então, tipo assim, não dava pra... taca JavaScript, taca Java. Não, cara, isso não existia. Eu nem sei se existia C++ aí nesse tempo, pra você ter noção. É 89. Java não nasceu, não.
Christmas holiday, I believe, he decided to spend his time designing and building a new programming language for the operating system based on the principles that he'd learned while on the ABC project.
It was logical that I would start with ABC as an example. The most prominent feature that Python borrowed from ABC is actually the use of indentation for statement grouping. But it was also logical that I sort of dropped the things from ABC that I didn't particularly like. That's how we ended up with Python.
Ele joga Pokémon.
Okay.
Olha o setup do cara, velho. Nada de RGB, nada muito particular, é só uma mesinha. É literal. Setup do cara que inventou o Python, a mesinha. Setup do cara que foi reprovado em cálculo 1. Cheio de luz.
Okay.
Diz eu que tô cheio de luz aqui.
I finally was confident enough of the interpreter, was complete enough that I showed it to Lambert.
He showed me a language he had developed stealthily, which he called Python, named after Monty Python.
I said, look what I made.
It was clear to me that it had...
Olha só, aqui, ó. Aqui, né, no lado de cá, tá ABC. É porque eu tô tampando, né? Eu tô tampando aqui, ó. Aqui, ó, tá o ABC. E nota que ele é muito parecido. Ele só tem, quando a gente fala de comandos, né, essas letras maiúsculas, né, que parece até um pouco com SQL. E olha só, isso daqui é um Python, aqui na frente, né, é um Python, mas não é, por exemplo, o Python 3 que a gente utiliza, parece mais Python 1 mesmo, né? E sabe o que é interessante da linguagem? É que, mesmo se você não souber programar, por exemplo, em Python 1, em Python 0, em Python 2, esses negócios, você consegue ver que a sintaxe é muito parecida, mesmo que os comandos sejam um pouquinho diferentes. Então, você conseguiria, por exemplo, mexer com Python 1. Isso é uma coisa que, sim, ainda é possível, né? É claro que é impraticável, mas é possível. Algumas linguagens, elas são impraticáveis de você quase fazer isso hoje. Você vai pegar um JavaScript da vida, você não consegue mexer de um modo parecido com o que a gente tem hoje. Java tem algumas versões que também não, principalmente o .NET, que tem aquele .NET Core, .NET Framework, .NET normal. Então, assim, isso aqui é muito interessante. Você ainda consegue mexer com um Python um pouco mais antigo, porque ele meio que ele se parece, né?
Had some resemblance to ABC.
The command line prompt is even the same. So Lambert watched me type a few things and...
Guido was excited about it, and he apparently thought I would be excited as well.
At some point he had seen enough and he said, "Can I try something?" And he types one very short line of code and it crashes the interpreter.
Ah, não vai rodar de primeira, não.
And he knew that it would.
The point escaped me. I didn't know why he thought this was better than ABC and why he had done this whole project.
I went back and the next day I had a fix for it. But it was a pretty crushing experience, to be honest.
It must have been at least half a year later that I first got acquainted with Python. So this is the office where Guido and I were holed up when he created Python.
There were two important users. Sjoerd was one of them, and the other was Jack Janssen.
Guido was sitting over there, and I was sitting over there. If you want to prototype a program, you sort of write the outlines of the program, but it doesn't actually work. When you do this in Python, it actually works. It's readable, it's very easy to program, and the indentation is totally natural, as far as I'm concerned anyway.
Sjoerd and Jack were the most active in using Python.
You find bugs, you find things that you want to extend.
And then telling me about it, because all they had to do was say, "Hey, Guido."
It was the first real interactive systems programming language, so you could just sit and write and run it immediately without any compilation. So it was much more fun to use than the old programming languages, but slower.
I think it was mostly Jack's idea in the end, while we all worked on it, to make an open source release.
CWI allowed Guido to distribute Python to the world as long as this copyright notice was there.
They would.
Só um segundinho, eu acho que não ficou exatamente claro, ou talvez eles passaram um pouquinho rápido, mas por que o Python deu certo e o ABC não deu certo, né? Tinham várias justificativas. O Guido, ele dá uma entrevista só falando isso. E o ABC era uma linguagem que ela era meio que compacta por si só, né? Ela não conseguia interagir de uma forma tão simples assim, por exemplo, com o sistema operacional do computador. Ela não conseguia interagir, por exemplo, com outras ferramentas de C. Então, era muito complexo você conseguir estender essa linguagem para alguma coisa. O Python já conseguia, né? Ela trazia a mesma sintaxe mais facilitada, só que ela conseguia mexer com outras interações em C, conseguia mexer ali com o sistema operacional. Então, se tornou uma coisa muito mais praticável. Por isso acabou vingando. E aí eles deixaram o ABC mais de lado, né, e focaram mesmo no Python. E aqui eles estão, né, falando que eles deixaram isso aqui open source, né? E naquela época, irmão, principalmente você falar de coisas open source, tinha muito... Não era que nem a cultura que a gente tem hoje, era meio que uma espécie de preconceito. Se você tem uma coisa que é gratuita, está sendo disponibilizada por aí, quer dizer que talvez não seja de boa qualidade. E, assim, nós estamos falando de uma época aqui, eu acho que isso aqui é começo dos anos 90, né? Então é bem difícil, né, essas situações. Como é que os caras principalmente vão jogar isso aqui para público, né? Sendo que a internet era uma coisa absurdamente nichada. Vamos ver.
They would have held back if they had known it would be such an incredible success. Which is good that they didn't know. Nobody knew. I didn't either. Because if they had held back, it would never have become an incredible success. Then we had to actually physically do the release, which turned out to be an incredible pain because Usenet was the only thing we had to release it.
Eu nem sei o que é isso, tá?
Usenet was a network of, you could say, bulletin boards. People would write messages, they would get distributed over the world, and then there were the groups for all the different computer languages.
Usenet had a very strict limit on the size of a single post. First, put your entire source tree in a tarball. Then compress it. Then you have to do another step where you turn the binary data into ASCII encoding. So I have this huge file with gobbledygook, but it's at least printable gobbledygook. And then you apply another tool that snips it into pieces. Then there's a script where if you have downloaded all 21 parts, you can undo all those operations in reverse. That was what people put up with. So we did all the work on our side, and plenty of people did all the work on their side to unpack this, because I had apparently written a very good teaser about what this was.
Que isso, cara, que trabalheira.
Very quickly, I started getting feedback via email or Usenet from people who had done something exciting with it or who had found a bug, and that just kept coming.
Então, tem uma galera que fala que isso daqui foi facilitado naquela época, porque quem mexia, por exemplo, com internet naquele período eram pessoas mais especializadas. Então, se um cara jogava, por exemplo, uma linguagem de programação nova com um interpretador por aí, assim, coisas que eu li por aí, né? Era mais fácil encontrar alguém que era especializado naquilo. Porque tinha que ser. Isso aqui não era uma coisa, mexe na internet aí. Não era desse jeito.
We worked at Johnson Space Center, so our interest was putting together flight simulations and tools for the design engineers that would be used for the shuttle program at the time.
Caramba!
I remember needing a scripting language to control a C++ library project we were working on at the time. Not too long into that search, I found Guido's Python distribution at CWI. I was able to FTP that down, unpack it, compile it, and run it in a matter of 10 minutes or so. That was my first impressive experience with Python.
20 years ago, a computer that cost $1 million and filled an entire room had less capability than an 11-pound desktop computer today. With costs going down and capabilities going up, the computer has entered our lives quickly and unobtrusively.
There were lots of things changing in a major way that made computing particularly exciting to be in at that time. Computers suddenly were coming out of the machine room and landing up on your desk, and then of course the web happened, then it all exploded.
After the internet came to Europe, it was much easier for software to be distributed.
Python very slowly took off. Then there was a growing Python community which was very supportive, like a big family, you could almost say.
Part of the benefit of this is that I don't, there's no strain on my body at all. I was working...
Que isso, o cara tá no modo tranquilão. Que isso, não foi o tranquilão que inventou isso aqui.
On developing a kind of distributed equipment database. And a colleague at the lab, Michael McClay, knew that I was looking for what was called a scripting language that was also sophisticated, that would enable you to build substantial things and not get bogged down in the ragged edges.
Scripting languages were designed to glue things together, to connect.
Ah, esse cara, rapidão. Esse aqui, olha, Tim O'Reilly. Ele é o cara que... Sabe aqueles livros do O'Reilly? É ele que faz. Caramba.
Things that already worked, that already existed.
Immediately on trying it, I was just amazed and thought this can't be as good as it is, and it was. Mike was interested in bringing Guido over, and Guido was interested in coming over.
99% of the people that I got in touch with were in the United States.
So Guido ended up coming. And then Mike and Guido and I wanted to arrange a workshop so people who were interested in Python could gather and talk about what they were working on and what they felt was needed.
This is the t-shirt for the first conference, and so this, yeah, that was just sort of flowy writing, and on the back it gave the date of the conference. Spum, 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 spum. It's such a fantastic song.
That workshop really is, for me, the beginning of the Python community, November 1994, Gaithersburg, Maryland, in this windowless government office building at Neste.
That was a great experience. It was about 2 days. We had 20 people. I still have the t-shirt from that workshop.
There was just kind of this feel of, hey, there's something happening. This will be fun to hang out with the people that I chat with online.
To actually see Guido in person and actually make decisions. And we knew that if you impressed him with the feature and it was an easy thing to install, he would add it to the language right there so that we can at least try it out in beta form.
There was like a whole room of people who knew what you were talking about because they had all studied Python deeply, or almost all.
One of the people was Barry Warsaw.
Around 1994, I joined a company, CNRI, Corporation for National Research Initiatives, and we were building these software agents, little programs that can move around to different computers on a network, and they pickle themselves up and move around to another place and reconstitute themselves and do some more work. A friend of mine from NIST sent me an email and said, hey, we've got this guy coming over from the Netherlands and he's going to talk about his language. Do you want to come? And so we went to the workshop and just absolutely fell in love with, of course, Python and, of course, Guido.
Even then, it had the feeling that there was a there, that there was something that was going to happen, that there was potential.
I remember coming back to CNRI and saying, oh, this is great. We're going to use Python for sure in our project. And one of our colleagues at CNRI said, well, what do you think? Why don't we just hire Guido?
Cara, imagina isso, bicho. Ah, nós estamos mexendo com a linguagem aqui. Ah, vamos contratar o cara que criou esse negócio. Mano, inimaginável pra mim. Só Google, esses lugares. Ah, vamos contratar o cara aí que criou a linguagem.
CNRI was set up to sort of promote information infrastructure, foster research, help build pilot projects, take the results and put them out into the public so that others could then leverage it.
Part of CNRI's mission was to cultivate internet-based things.
That's why our name, Corporation for National Research Initiatives, has the word initiatives in there. We had a need for a language that would be easier for people to deal with than any other traditional languages that were around at the time.
I ran across a photograph. There was a party at CNRI years ago. It was probably, I think, 1996. And it's Guido Ranrasim.
Yeah, I used to say Guido. Many people say Guido, but I said Guido, and I'm sure I don't pronounce it right. Oh, he was a very stylish.
Cara, meu Deus do céu. É ele aqui, olha, com a camisa... Nossa, meu pai amado. Nota que toda hora que eles falam de Python, eles sempre falam de facilidade. A linguagem é fácil. Aí o povo fica assim, ah, não, Python não é fácil, não. Cara, aceita a realidade, Python é uma linguagem que foi desenhada para ser fácil, e tá tudo bem.
He's a very strong fellow.
Got introduced to him, and it just seemed like it was a good fit, and so I made the job offer.
For me, it was fantastic. There's no doubt about that.
One of the things he insists on, if you want to get him to work for you, is that he has some fraction of his time, preferably as much as half time, if not more, to work on the language itself.
The fact that they could work full-time on Python, because it turned out that the NoBots project was almost more an excuse to hire me than I did much for that.
I kind of feel like our work on Python was a little subversive. You know, we tended to spend a lot more time on Python than maybe we should have.
I went to CNRI, and since I had been a systems person, I was responsible for setting up python.org.
We should have also grabbed Python.com, even though we didn't think of Python as a commercial enterprise, because someone else got it and used it to host a stupid porn site. For years, we had to warn people, go.
Procurando por negócios hardcore, né? Aqui nós, putz, grilo, XXX passaporte. Cara, que isso, velho? Que isso, cara? Os caras meteram aqui o Xvideos do tempo, era aqui, velho.
Go to python.org, not .com.
It really was the perfect home, I think, for doing all of that early Python development and develop a lot of the infrastructure around Python.
We had a meeting discussing making some kind of user group or software organization where the Python software activity was proposed.
Caramba, velho. Aquele site que você entra e é o sitezinho lá do Python, Pt.1, onde que você baixa o Python. Era isso aí antigamente, olha. Verdão. Nem sei se aqui já tinha a logozinha das cobrinhas, né, do Python. Nossa.
We need a little bit of governance, a little bit of organization, but we don't want too much, because I don't think any of us really liked bureaucracy.
And then the question came up about what we should call Guido as part of that. I think it was me who suggested that Guido be called the benevolent dictator. And then Barry suggested benevolent dictator for life. And that became an internet meme, or actually a software meme. Benevolent dictator for life was, you can find it on Wikipedia.
Ultimately, you know, Guido was the inventor of the language and the final decider about, yes, this is going to make it in or this is not going to make it in.
I think I developed my own style during those first years. All ideas are welcome, but I will choose which ideas I believe are right to add to the language.
There's dozens and dozens of aspects of Python today where somebody had a vision for, if you just add this to Python, look at all these amazing things that I can do.
I'm one of the many people that came to Python not as a programmer, but as a scientist. Python wasn't the first language I used for science. I was doing satellite data processing, and I used Perl to do it. And then a year later, I would come back and try to figure out what I'd done, and I had no idea. Python had the opposite experience. I first started using Python in 1997. I used it to do some scripting.
Irmão, eu acho que esse cara foi o cara que fundou o NumPy. Talvez eu tô falando besteira, não sei, mas eu acho que esse cara aqui foi o cara que fundou o NumPy.
Do some data processing with some medical imaging data. And I was like, hey, this is nice, this is pretty cool. A year later, so 1998, I came back to look at the code I'd written and I could read it. I understood what I did. And that was kind of, for me, the convincing data that said, oh, I need to dig in on this language. And there were a few really key people at that time who were publishing or talking about how to use Python for science. Not very many, but a few. Conrad Hinson was one of them, I remember, and David Asher and Jim Huguenin.
There's been a number of stages in the life cycle of Python when it just grew from a core language capability to a platform with a number of different specialty modules and packages that made it very, very useful for certain user communities. The first one was probably the numeric community, the science and engineering folks that wanted high-performance matrix operations to be done.
Even though Guido wasn't a scientist himself, wasn't necessarily deeply concerned with the same things that we were concerned with as scientists, he was open to the suggestions.
I think one of the things that people don't appreciate about the Python language as much now that it's so popular and mainstream is how important it was that Guido was open to new ideas and open to the needs of people who are not traditional programmers.
I think he had a very clear-eyed, quiet focus on understanding.
Caramba, mano. Nota que, tipo assim, Python não foi feito necessariamente para essa parte mais científica, para essa parte de dados. Só que meio que foi se abraçando isso, né? Nota que a facilidade que a própria linguagem deu foi tomando esse rumo, né? E o Guido, principalmente por ser uma pessoa muito aberta a esse tipo de opinião, ele foi adicionando isso à linguagem. Essa é uma história muito bacana, cara, de verdade. Se ele não fosse uma pessoa tão flexível assim, Python talvez nunca seria voltada para essa área de dados.
Understanding some things about the future that he built into the language. It was uniquely suited to its environment.
One of the reasons I use Python, and I think a lot of people use Python.
Opa! Esse aqui é olha aqui, ó. Criador do Flask. Esse cara deu uma treta gigantesca há uns anos pra frente. Eu acho que eles vão falar sobre isso. Mas esse cara aqui é o criador, o Creator of Flask. Nossa, cara, ele apareceu aqui. Eu não sei se vai aparecer. É porque quando teve a passagem pro Python de 2 para 3, esse cara comprou uma briga absurda. Eu acho que eles vão falar sobre isso aqui nesse documentário. Não tem que falar, cara, porque é parte da história. Mas... Mas vamos ver isso daqui, ó. Talvez seja um spoiler que eu esteja falando.
Use Python at the time is that in the early 2000s, the world was almost divided into here's an open source ecosystem, or you can go and use Java, which is actually a paid thing.
I was using MATLAB. I really didn't like the fact that when I wrote code and I wanted to share that code with others, I was essentially telling people they had to go buy a license for a software package before they could even look at my code or use my code.
You know, these are the days where you have to like buy the developer tools or spend a couple $100 to get Visual Studio 6.0 and then Python, and then all of these libraries were open source and then could be used in a commercial project.
I was sort of early on convinced by community members that Python being open source and the particular way it was open source was very important so that people would feel comfortable using Python to make great things that they would then be able to sell.
Cara, eu passei por isso aqui por um tempo, principalmente nos meus momentos de faculdade. Porque lá a gente usava MATLAB, né? Não usava Python ainda para fazer análise de dados ou qualquer coisa do tipo. E nossa, meu pai amado, eu detestava MATLAB com todas as minhas forças. Primeiro, porque aquele negócio ali, você tinha que sentar 3 horas no teu PC para craquear o MATLAB. Ah, Rafa, mas ele tem lá a versão mais baratinha para quem é estudante, não sei o que. Irmão, estudante universitário não tem grana. Aí era muito chato de você ficar mexendo com esses negócios. Aí eu lembro que quando uma pessoa da sala achou, por exemplo, os crack lá pra você pegar MATLAB, a sala inteira ia lá e pegava também. Nossa, de verdade, velho. Faculdade que ainda fica mexendo com MATLAB, pelo amor de Deus, cara. Vamos melhorar os negócios e os processos. Porque era bem difícil. E ainda continua, né? Eu acho que onde eu estudei o povo ainda mexe muito com MATLAB. Olha o Blender aí, ó. Essa daqui é uma história boa com Python, hein?
In 98, Blender was published on the internet. The software was free, and then you could buy some things around it. We were restricted to use open source, so you didn't have a lot of options. We were doing a call on our website, like, what is the most popular scripting language that we should add in Blender? Perl was really big, and Python was upcoming, and there were some others. And it was interesting to see that everybody who was advising us to use Perl, a scripting language, that they only advertised how great Perl is. And the people who came more from the Python background, who said, well, I think Python is a better choice, they came with a balanced opinion. They said, okay, Perl will give you this and this and this, and Python will give you other things. And balancing all of it, I would recommend you to do Python. And only for that reason, I picked Python. Just because the people were nicer.
Cara, assim, olha, rapidinho também. A galera tá falando muito de Perl aqui, né? Toda hora alguém fala de Perl e tudo mais. É porque, na verdade, naquele tempo, Perl era uma linguagem bem popular mesmo, né? Porque ela tinha suas facilidades. Se você começar a pesquisar um pouco sobre Perl, você vai ver que o início da web foi muito baseado em C++ e Perl. Então era uma linguagem que estava, assim, uma espécie de ascensão. Depois ela começou a ir um pouco para o desuso. Mas você vai ver que Perl, ele teve assim, um papel muito interessante, principalmente quando a gente fala de regex, né? Aquelas expressões regulares. Para a galera ali naquele tempo, era uma mão na roda você mexer com isso. Isso foi uma das causas da popularidade de Perl. O próprio Facebook começou, né, com uma parte ali tendo Perl. Então, é uma linguagem que valeu muito a pena naquele tempo e todo mundo, né, estava recomendando. Ou era isso ou era Java, né?
It was honestly just a lot of enthusiasts. It was a lot of people who just enjoyed the language, enjoyed the people involved with the language, and it would just happen to be typically motivating enough for people to want to help out.
Ultimately, there's a sense of fun that comes across, and Guido coded that into the name of the language, influenced by Monty Python.
It creates a sense of community to have your little jokes. Tim Peters is a famous early example in blending both like the aesthetics of Python and humor.
Tim Peters was this mythical creature in the world of Python, and no one had met him.
He was out there in the ether as a wise one to give us advice on what to do with numerical processing.
Steve Majeski sent me some email telling me about Python. So I started an email correspondence with Guido about the language and about the design, and I got some of the pre-release code and played with it and talked to him about design decisions and liked it very much.
Tim Peters was a Python contributor and community member and mentor to me from very early on.
Tim was a channeler of Guido. He had a really unique way of saying, I think Guido's going to like this, or I don't think Guido's going to like that.
There's a poem called The Zen of Python, which is a partially humorous, partially serious poem about the aesthetics of Python.
I'm actually looking at the Usenet post where Tim posted his first version of the Zen of Python, although he called it the way of Python. And it was in response to some discussion where people were complaining that they didn't understand what was Python's philosophy. They couldn't figure me out. And Tim had figured me out, and he put it basically in poetry. Here is The Way of Python by Tim Peters from 1999. Beautiful is better than ugly. Duh.
Explicit is better than implicit.
Simple is better than complex.
Complex is better than complicated. I love that distinction.
Flat is better than nested.
Sparse is better than dense.
Readability counts. I will say it counts for a lot.
Special cases aren't special enough to break the rules.
Although practicality beats purity.
Errors should never pass silently
unless explicitly silenced.
In the face of ambiguity, refuse the temptation to guess.
I did not follow that in a very key piece of NumPy, and it's still a mess.
There should be one, and preferably only one, obvious way to do it.
That's a direct reference to Perl's motto of there's more than one way to do it, by the way.
Although that may not be obvious at first, unless you're Dutch.
Now is better than never.
Although never is often better than right now.
If the implementation is hard to explain, it's a bad idea.
That's a really good one.
If the implementation is easy to explain,
it may be a good idea.
Namespaces are one honking great idea.
Let's do more of those.
This is so Tim.
normally import this, import some useful library, which is very serious business. Having an import this that was just a joke was a bit of lightness that we like to add.
This is from a small hobbyist community, right? Because if you're a
Deixa eu mostrar. Nossa, esse cara aqui, olha, ele me dá uma sensação de que ele programa pra caramba e ao mesmo tempo nunca vi um Paint na vida. Mas deixa eu mostrar um negócio aqui, olha. Se você nunca viu isso daqui na sua vida, é porque acontece o seguinte, olha. Deixa eu pegar aqui o meu terminal. Se você nunca viu isso daqui na sua vida, eu vou te mostrar. Então, deixa eu só aumentar um pouquinho aqui pra gente ver. Sim, o meu PC ele se chama Artemis. É o seguinte, nós estamos aqui. Se eu chegar aqui, olha, e escrever Python 3, eu entro no interpretador do Python, né? Só que aí a gente pode fazer o seguinte, import this. É isso que eles estão falando. Se você jogar isso daqui, olha, vai aparecer um poeminha. Que é aqui o poema que eles acabaram de citar, né? Aqui, olha, o Zen do Python de Tim Peters, que é esse cara que eles estão falando toda hora aí. E é exatamente o poema que eles citaram, né? Isso aqui é mais ou menos como que é, assim, o jeito da linguagem Python, né? Então, assim, é muito interessante porque na própria linguagem tu tem isso. Se você pegar o teu interpretador agora e fazer isso daqui, vai aparecer um poema para você. Tem um poema embutido no Python. E aí é isso aqui, né? Como que é a ideia de você programar em Python em si, né?
If you're a corporate behemoth making a programming language, like someone's probably going to tell you that you can't put a silly poem in your programming language, but Python is just made by dogs on the internet, so they can put poems in their software.
The different ways to make money on the internet are just beginning to emerge. Entrepreneurs are putting their faith in a new medium to deliver the big payoff.
It's the dot-com bubble, all this money pumping into Silicon Valley software and internet stuff.
Early 2000, I decided to leave CNRI and with a few coworkers join.
Mano, de verdade, olha o naipe dos caras, velho. Se você contrata um cara nessa lata pra tua empresa, teu código tá muito bem seguro, teu produto tá muito bem seguro.
Joined a little startup named Be-Open.
While CNRI, I think, was an amazing home for Python in the early days, everything changes and everything evolves. And thinking, well, if we're going to strike out on our own, this is probably the right time to do that.
That didn't work out. I'd say within maybe a year or something.
Be-Open was completely incompetent.
We spent the summer in blissful ignorance working full-time on Python. We built and released Python 2, and within 5 months, it was over.
We were paid our salaries every 2 weeks, and then suddenly in late October, we weren't.
It was a moment where the shit could have hit the fan. If all the Python guys went their separate ways, Python wasn't big enough to survive that at the time. That was when I had a company, Digital Creations, that later became Zope,
which is an application server, database server, index server, web server, etc.
Aqui, ó, tá vendo esse Zope aqui, ó, Zope foi a primeira framework web em Python, né? Antes de Django, antes de Flask, antes de Fast API. Será que Fast API vai aparecer aqui? Não sei. Mas esse Zope aí foi o primeiro.
Very large scale commercial quality application written in Python.
And if Python died, you know who else would die? He'd die.
The whole platform was built on Python, so they were Python experts.
We need to go and make sure that Python is secure for the future and that the team stays together.
So we negotiated an agreement with them to join my company.
That was an incredibly lucky rescue.
We felt like we really trusted them and we believed in what they were doing and what they wanted to do with Python and for Python.
This is a place that I'm proud of.
In hindsight, it was a really critical point in Python's life. I think if we had chosen wrong or tried to say, oh, well, we'll just strike out on our own anyway, you never know. But I'm not so sure that Python would have survived that juncture in its life. Yeah.
LOL.
Python just kept sort of growing and the community kept self-organizing.
One of the, I think, underlying themes of Python, if you take it in its totality, is this sense of grassroots movements. Things grow from the bottom up and evolve to the point where everybody sort of realizes, oh, we need a little bit more structure.
Oh, the Python Software Foundation.
In my opinion, the PSF, that damn thing was a success from day one.
That came out of one of the concerns we had with Be Open, actually. So CNRI had written a license for Python and put its name on it. And Be Open had copied a version of that license and put the Be Open name on it. There was a concern that at some point I might accidentally end up working for a company that tried to grab ownership of Python.
We realized that we really need an organization that will be independent, will not be beholden to any company and their whims and their lawyers, and will really keep Python users as their first and foremost customer, so to speak, in mind.
And then the magic happened when we got into PyCon, which is maybe the third stool of the miracle of Python.
What has been your takeaway from PyCon US this year?
It feels like people are still willing to go do hard things, work on things together, you know?
They still do have the passion, to be honest.
So what was it for you?
For me, most definitely like meeting people I haven't met in a while.
That's cool, isn't it?
Yeah, and just pretty much hanging out with them.
You try to walk.
Yeah.
So the other side, there's like 10 people that you want to see in between.
Like,
stop, I want to talk to you.
I know.
Pablo and Yuri presented as bananas.
Yeah. And
then Lukasz asked the question dressed as a banana. And then Guido came in dressed as a banana as well.
Thank you for what you do for the PSF. Please don't step down, just keep doing it forever. Raise your hand if you love the web. Just raise your hand down. Raise your hand if you have done React front ends. Raise your hand if you would like to come back. No, come back to Python. All right, good. For the record, 100%.
I begged my mother to take me to PyCon, and I met all my online heroes. He was this distant, benevolent dictator for life who I'd been talking to over the internet, but here he was in person, and so.
Cara, isso daí, olha, é uma coisa rara. O Guido não gosta de tirar foto com os outros. É meio esquisito, né? Mas ele não gosta de tirar hoje em dia foto com os outros. Tenta ir no Instagram desse cara. Tenta ir lá no Instagram do Guido Van Ross. Você vai ver que ele tem poucas fotos. Acho que nenhuma dele mesmo, assim.
So I was thrilled to be able to finally meet him. Then I think everyone was aware that he was a 15-year-old kid on the other end of that terminal.
When PyCon was held in Montreal, the organizer asked me if I'd be willing to give an opening address to the conference. Well, I'm a slightly fast talker, and I had some spare time. And I just used it as an opportunity to say thank you. I like to think of it as I came for the language, but I stayed for the community. So I want to personally thank all of you for making this such a wonderful place to be and such a wonderful group of people to be around. So thank you. Luckily it came off well because people still quote it. I think it kind of speaks to the core ethos of Python. We try to develop this tool that people can use for their needs to get their work done. But the community is the true strength of Python. It's not just the language, right? It's the people.
It was steadily growing every single year. It was getting more and more downloads, more and more people making use of it.
It became a more sophisticated language that was fit to purpose for this new emerging programming paradigm where the web itself is the platform.
He told me an interesting number that made me realize that the Python user community was already much bigger than I had estimated. Because he said, Guido, you don't know the sales numbers for Python books.
Aí, ó.
But I am Tim O'Reilly. I published the 2 most important ones. And I do know the sales numbers. And they are fantastic. I don't know if he had that much enthusiasm in his voice then, but he was sharing this new to me important fact, which made me realize, oh my gosh.
Python tends to get spikes when certain specialties, I guess you could say, pick the language up and decide that this is a thing that they want to use in their area.
Everybody wanted to do things with the World Wide Web, and Python actually became a really powerful platform for doing not just web pages, but web servers and services.
And suddenly we had an increase of people coming in from the web world.
I think Dropbox was one of the early companies to start building in Python and reaching millions of users.
My name's Drew, and I'll be showing you a quick tour of Dropbox, which is a new way to store and share files online.
Python had been largely viewed as a scripting language you run on the back end, or maybe in an academic setting or in a scientific setting, but not really for like production desktop software that you'd ship to millions.
Então, agora é que o bagulho começa a ficar pesado, porque você vê algumas empresas de nível global metendo Python ali no meio, né? E aí que começou realmente, né, a ter esse pico de popularidade. Geralmente uma linguagem ela se torna absurdamente popular quando isso acontece. Quando uma empresa pega, né, um pouco dela ali e coloca. Por exemplo, o Nubank utiliza Clojure. Eu acho que uma boa parte dos brasileiros não saberiam o que é Clojure se o Nubank nunca tivesse, por exemplo, utilizado essa linguagem. Então, algumas empresas começaram a utilizar o Python. Uma muito importante foi o Instagram, né? Não sei se isso vai ser mostrado aqui, mas fica de curiosidade.
Millions of people. But I just started writing in Python and hoping that none of the roadblocks would completely blow me up.
You can develop programs much faster in Python because it's a higher level language and it's a very clean, easy language. And so we could be a lot more competitive than other companies who were writing with Java or C++ or Perl.
Even back then, we were competing against the Googles and Microsofts of the world, and you know, our odds didn't seem very good, so we needed all the help we can get.
Google had this big team, like 100 people, C++ programmers, trying to do a video hosting site. And they could never keep up with this little thing over there called YouTube. And they went and looked, and it was just a couple of people writing Python.
Python ended up being a big force multiplier on our effort, and no other language that we considered had anything close to that kind of capability.
Eu não sabia do YouTube não, tá? Do YouTube eu não sabia. Legal.
The fact that data science suddenly became a thing that you had to do, combined with the fact that Python was sort of well positioned to do data science stuff, meant a huge amount of new Python users flowed in.
Cara, é aqui, ó. Vou até voltar um pouquinho. Tem como voltar isso aqui? Pô, cara, não tem como. Mas aqui, ó.
The fact that data science suddenly became a thing that you had to do, combined with the fact that Python was sort of well positioned to do data science stuff, meant a huge amount of...
Aqui, ó. Deixa eu baixar a legenda. 2010, 2012. Aqui, algumas das ferramentas que a gente conhece de dados começou a nascer. Nascer mais ou menos, né? Mas eles estavam... Eu não consigo abaixar isso aqui. E pronto. Eles começaram a ganhar atração. Principalmente você vai ver o Pandas, você vai ver o NumPy, você vai ver muitas dessas bibliotecas, né, que mexem com dados. Elas começaram aqui, olha. Foi nesse período. Aqui realmente teve uma reviravolta, né, para esse mundo de Python, porque muita coisa foi adicionada, né?
New Python users flowed in.
What was starting to happen in the 2009, 2010 timeframe, we were seeing more and more of our consulting deals tied to using Python not as really a replacement for MATLAB or engineering type things, but using Python for doing data processing. We didn't call it data science at the time, but it was that kind of work, right? It was modeling, predictive analytics, things like that.
This is the time of Hadoop, the time of big data, the time of Spark, and people were doing Java at scale.
We were starting to do much more consulting work in the financial industry. And we'd walk into these large, very well-capitalized firms, and they were using Python to do business data processing. I realized, okay, if it's a research group over here doing some science research, and they don't have money and they use an open source thing, I get it. But if you have JP Morgan, right, which has a lot of money, and they're picking up and using these scientific tools, and they're loving it, I realized that we didn't just have a cheap, free alternative. We actually had something that was innovative, and that was doing something fairly unique.
Peter and I ended up leaving and starting another company. We started as Continuum Analytics, actually, and its vision was to scale NumPy and Pandas to large data sets and large clusters.
We quickly ran into a simple problem.
Very quickly
but a very annoying problem.
Yes.
People just couldn't even install the software needed to run all this Python stuff. The thing about the Python scientific and data stack is that all of these different libraries, they're very different than the web development libraries, because these data libraries are often backed by a very large amount of complex C++, Fortran, other kinds of software modules. And to build those correctly takes some work. To build them correctly on every operating system takes even more work. And then to build them so that they can actually be connected together, that requires you to have this entire build system rationalized.
And so the very first thing we did was like make a distribution of Python to make it easy to get that installed.
A lot of the data science Python people, they didn't even use normal Python, they used this Anaconda Python distribution.
Sort of a dumb joke that I came up with at one point. It was basically Python for big data, so it's a big snake, so Anaconda. After like a few years, we kept going to conferences and going to places, and people wouldn't know who we were. But the instant that we mentioned that we make Anaconda, they would say, oh yeah, of course, I love Anaconda, I use it all the time, right? So after that happened like the 1,000th time, we said, okay, maybe we should rename the company Anaconda.
Data engineering became a discipline where Python was incredibly entrenched.
It was Python and R, and over time, Python's data analysis libraries caught up, and plotting libraries and stuff started to catch up to what R had. And then people realized, oh, well, with Python, I can work end-to-end with my data versus R being very good at data analysis, but not necessarily like the data collection stage and various other stages.
I remember going to a Python conference at one point, and I was like, there's so many sciencey people here. Like, where are all the web developers? This is all data pipelines and stuff.
I don't want to be immodest about this because it was a collective effort for the whole community, but I think that what we did at Anaconda, not only making the software installer that made it one click for people to just run, but also shepherding the conferences and building that community and whatnot was really critical.
They were incredibly important contributions.
I think we actually made Python super popular. I think we did.
Não, ele tá certo. Se esse cara aqui não ficou multibilionário, eu tô maluco. É sério. Quando fizeram Anaconda, isso foi uma das grandes explosões de popularidade que o Python teve.
I think we did.
Cara, eu vou parar por aqui. A gente vai ver o restante aqui desse documentário aqui mais pra frente, porque senão, cara, já tá dando 1 hora de gravação aqui, né? Isso daqui fica impraticável. Mas beleza. Sexta-feira eu vou soltar a segunda parte. E aí a gente troca essa ideia lá.